Meeting of the Thurston County Planning Commission. The Thurston County Planning Commission is a resident advisory committee to the Board of County Commissioners on land use planning matters such as the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance amendments. Planning Commission actions are in the form of recommendations to the county commissioners, who are the final decision makers. All Planning Commission meetings are open to the public. Community members are welcome to observe all Planning Commission briefings and work sessions. Public comment is welcome during the public communications section of each meeting and during any scheduled public hearings. We will start tonight's meeting with introductions. To my left.
Hi, my name is Eric Casino. I live in the Lacey UGA and I serve the commission at large.
Kevin Pestinger in District 5.
Yvonne Miller, District 1.
Daniel Baumbarger, District 1.
Sandy Kaiser, District 3.
Bill Fishburne, I live and serve in District 4.
And I'm Joel Hanson, serving District 3. No, serving District 3. And do we have any commissioners on the line?
No. Commissioner Bartlett is trying to join.
Okay.
Trying to resend him the link.
Commissioner Halverson should be joining online as well.
Okay. Okay. We have an agenda in front of us, and I would take a motion to approve.
So moved.
All those in favor?
All right.
Okay, we have an agenda. Next, we have, do we have any meeting minutes? Okay. Then next we have public communication. Is anyone signed up to communicate? Oh. Come right up.
I just want to make a brief statement. I will be sending you guys some references, both for climate change and for species, just as supplemental information should go out. The other thing is in terms of, if you're going to be talking about tree canopy, I've come across a couple of research articles that are very clear that mature and particularly structurally complex forests and that kind of habitat with down trees, snags and stuff like that is a much more high quality habitat than just plantations or reforesting, you know, like when you do landscaping and stuff like that. So when you're thinking about critical areas and you're thinking about retaining forest land, please think about the mature, you know, leaving things standing for longer periods of time and not cleaning them up so that they look pretty for landscaping. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else signed up to?
Anyone signed up?
Okay, well, please come to the mic. Just state your name, where you live, and then.
My name is Bruce Anderson. Been born and raised in Olympia. Currently reside up past the Delphi Golf Course. I've got two borders with Capitol Forest. And I live on Stony Creek, and just wanted to make sure it's available. The data I've collected over 25 years of living there. We've had two major slides in 2007 and 2008, where it basically pretty much took my driveway away and did massive damage to Stony Creek itself. So I've actually documented the slides, the fish habitat, all that kind of stuff, and would love to make it available for people for planning, be able to do risk assessment to look at it and say, okay, there's some planned logging in the future up there. Look at it saying before and after. Is this really, did the risk assessment work? Did it make any changes to, you know, the land down below that's, you know, that I get affected by? So really, I just want an opportunity to, and I talked to Kevin, and it's a good, you know, provide him with a lot of the stuff. And I've got some pretty dramatic pictures of all this, such as, you know, when 3 feet of snow was on the ground right before, you know, we got monsoon come in, and that's caused one of the landslides. So anyway, a lot of data I'd like to be able to share. So hopefully that's good feedback for planning these critical areas.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Blessing. I live close to Stony Creek, and I walked around up on the east side of Capitol Forest a lot, and they kind of map it as bedrock, and so it sounds like it's competent stuff, but it's really this decomposed bedrock on steep slopes called saprolite. It's a clay that this basalt decomposes to, and things slide on it. pretty easily. And there's gravel down below and this clay stuff up above, and it's like saprolite. It's not bedrock. There's bedrock way down there, basalt, but it's decomposed and it's slippery. So I just wanted, like, ask DNR about that, you know.
Anybody else like to provide a comment tonight? Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anyone online that would like to address the planning commission tonight? Please indicate so by raising your virtual hand.
Just for the record, Commissioner Bartlett is not with us.
Okay. Looks like Christy would like to give a comment. Christy, we can see you've been up there. Now you're unmuted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Christy White and I live in the Delphi Valley, and I am a neighbor of Bruce Anderson, who just spoke to you a few minutes ago. Our properties are actually adjoining, and I wanted to echo his concerns regarding slides. I will have further comments for you at the next Planning Commission meeting more about that, but I can also attest to the fact the challenges when we have slopes and what that means for the adjoining neighbors for geological landslides. But what I wanted to talk to you about this evening was my comments are relative to the discussions that we've had regarding the ability for properties in the county to be compliant and meet code. As the comprehensive plan is updated and the complexities of adding new housing options such as ADUs, updating critical area ordinances, and reviewing these geological hazards, the importance of supporting code compliance becomes even more critical. So the current process of identifying code issues is, if you see me, catch me if you can, and it's after the fact. So I would like to encourage you to consider reaching out to the Nonprofit Center for Community Progress. This is a nonprofit that provides many resources to explore new concepts and ideas about code enforcement, such as land banks, and reevaluating the approach to code compliance. Some ideas would be to create a certification program for contractors who meet the qualifications and complete periodic continuing education. So when they go to do permit fees or apply for permits, they might get a discount because they're certified and you know they're going to do the right thing. Also look at what kind of grant funding might be available to reimburse a portion of permit fees. So I think there's options, and my ask is that we kind of step outside the box and look at a different approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Would anybody else online like to provide comment? I'm not seeing any hands raised. I will note that Commissioner Bartlett is with us. Hi, Colin. Good to see you.
You waved.
Okay, that will close our public communication portion of the meeting. And now we are on to agenda item 3, new business and work session 1, tree canopy report.
Share my screen. So the primary purpose here is just to announce both to the Planning Commission and to interested members of the public that the Tree Canopy Report, which I believe was presented to you all in the spring, if I remember right, has been completed. It is published, it is online, it is available as a resource. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen so that folks know how to locate that on our website.
Clarity. I don't think it was presented to us in the spring.
We saw some draft maps, but I don't believe we saw the actual.
Not the report, but we discussed the tree canopy assessment.
That it existed and it had been completed.
And it was being worked on and
reading on it.
Mm-hmm. So all you have to do to find it on our webpage is from any page on the website, you can use the search bar and type Healthy Forest Project. And then it's the first link right there, and that's available to everybody. And this is what it looks like.
If you were to type tree canopy in the search bar, would it get you to the same place?
That's a good question. I don't believe
Drum roll,
that it
please.
will give you the same result, which is part of the purpose of the announcement, because it's on our Healthy Forest Project page.
Sure.
And I might be able to work to improve the search engine optimization on that, but for right now, this is where it's at.
Okay.
I'm assuming there's a way to navigate to it outside of searching for it? Like it exists somewhere in a website structure, right?
Be really nice, wouldn't it?
I mean, just saying, it's been, yeah.
Since we don't have a copy of it here, would you be willing to read us the executive summary?
Sure, that's a great idea. The tree canopy refers to the layer of leaves, branches, and stems that covers the ground when viewed from above. A tree canopy assessment helps communities make smarter decisions by showing where trees are already growing and where there is room to add more. The Thurston County Tree Canopy Assessment outlined in this report offers more than just a snapshot of tree canopy coverage in rural areas. It also provides insight into other land cover types, conversion risk, and opportunities for tree canopy restoration. This information can help the county and its regional partners prioritize restoration efforts and better apply tools to prevent permanent forest loss. It also sheds light on how forests and prairies are connected across the county's landscape, helping to guide efforts to protect and restore these important ecosystems. This data is currently informing the Thurston County Comprehensive Plan update and guiding research focused on riparian habitat protection. In the future, the tree canopy assessment may help the county and other regional planning partners prioritize programmatic forest restoration efforts, develop regulatory tools for tree canopy conservation, apply for funding to support tree canopy restoration, understand relationships between tree canopy and other aspects of the environment, restore prairie and Oregon white oak habitats, and plan for carbon sequestration efforts to mitigate the effects of climate change.
To answer your question, it will not come up if you search that.
That was good stuff, okay.
We love it, maybe.
You can get to it, but you need to navigate to elected offices, then to CPED, then to community planning, and then the Healthy Forest projects.
Right where I would have.
So I think when it was briefly discussed that we were gonna learn more about this, Ashley was really excited about this whole project and dug into it and looked at pictures and tried to do some analysis, and I think she might have even shared I don't think she shared the exact 61% number here, but she shared it was a pretty high proportion. She mentioned a few things. One, that there was fairly little land capable of increasing our coverage. Number two, that the way of calculating this coverage is a little complex. Can you describe for us what that process is? Like, let's say, is it measured on an acre basis, some other smaller amount basis? And is it if there's one single tree on an acre that equals coverage, or is it an actual percentage of all of the land that's determined that 61%?
So there's the way it's calculated and there's the way it's displayed. It's calculated directly from LiDAR data. And what that does is basically super high res scans of the earth with tons, like LiDAR data is really exciting, as you guys will find out from DNR next planning commission meeting. And so that is just like geographic data. They're able to scan to a really fine-tuned level to see, like, in any given amount of area, what's the percent that's covered by trees. And so that ostensibly could be a parcel by parcel or acre by acre, or in the case of how it's displayed on these maps, a 250 acre area. And so what we did for these for the purpose of visualization, and so that's what you see on the actual maps, like the one I have up here. These are 250 acre hexagons. That's a good size for it to be legible and visible. And because the report is not necessarily intended to be used at the site level, gives you a view of various regions of the county, and it creates a standardized shape, because when you're dealing with percentages, which most of these are, you want to have a kind of a standard unit, because 100% of a really small parcel being covered in trees is super different than 2% of a giant parcel being covered in trees. Or that might actually be the same number of trees. So in order to accurately display percentages, it's been chopped up into even-sized pieces across the whole county. Does that answer?
Mostly, I mean, it's a start. Not that I want you to keep going, but can you describe a little bit what's a chopped up? Are we talking 1 acre? What's a chopped up look like?
Well, what you see up here on the screen now, so these are the 250 acre hexagons, and that's how it's divided visually.
Thank you.
Commissioner Casino.
I was hoping that maybe you could explain to us a little bit about what is encompassed in the term of tree canopy, because I know that it's more than just trees. Like if I got a 12-foot tall Himalayan blackberry bushes covering 250 acres, is that going to be considered tree canopy? Or if I have 18-inch tall salal covering everything, is that tree canopy? Or if I have prairie grass that's 3 inches tall, where is this differentiation happening?
I have some wicked tall shrubs.
I think I'm looking at the end here.
Short trees.
I think it does discuss that, and off the top of my head, I want to say that it's 7 feet tall. It does use vegetation height. So it's like the LiDAR data can't necessarily know whether each individual point of vegetation is a tree versus a large shrub versus a baby tree versus a bush. So I know there are some disclaimers about, like, for example, in working forest areas, some of the areas that don't say tree canopy might actually be recently replanted little baby trees that are bush sized and therefore not counted in this as tree canopy, but still counted as vegetation. So I think the height cutoff is somewhere around 7 feet.
Commissioner Bumbar.
I just point out, in the report, in the appendix, there is a grass and shrub map as well.
Yes.
Based on height that will give you an idea of where's where. It tends to align with where the prairies are at.
Yes.
It's orange, I believe, towards the end. I'm not sure if that's something we could show them.
Yeah,
real quick. I
well, for the first one might actually say as well.
think it's almost at the end.
I get a follow up. Go ahead if you have.
Well, I'll wait for a second. So go ahead.
All related, intertwined with all this is, I'm wondering about, so the number 61% just starts right out as throwing me off a little bit. It seems like a high number and more than I would have expected, but that's why I'm curious about all the methodology and whatnot. I'm a little bit curious also the difference, like you look at that original map, the first one you showed us that was purple, and it seemed like the cities themselves probably make up 30% of the acreage of the county.
They're excluded from this.
Yeah. There's
So
no
it's
cities, no
only including
UGAs.
rural,
This is
right?
rural only,
And UGA is not included?
not included.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So then of the county, it makes me wonder about things like tree farms, things like state forest, national forest. Do we have, I mean, I would imagine you guys have pretty good guess off the top of your head. Do we have mostly national forest and next to no state forest in Thurston County, or is it
We
different?
have state forest.
They stay.
Capital forest.
Capital forest is state. Okay, so
Quite a lot of like commercial timberland,
Yeah.
like in some of those things, swaths. down there.
Mostly-
Like,
Yeah, actually, this is a good map to visualize where a lot of the commercial timberland and like forest working lands are, because those were excluded from tree canopy restoration areas because they're already part of a like ongoing forest management program. So the white areas on here tend to be
Not quite.
comprised mostly of currently working and therefore currently being replanted and managed forests.
that's really,
So those are the white areas,
Mhm.
the south of the county and the
Yeah.
west of the county.
There
Okay.
are also maps that are by
Zone and use type
Yep.
and that kind of thing. So those are in the appendix as well, which is a little tricky to show up here because to get their full size, they're sideways.
so when it says there in the bottom one, 68% of the tree canopies on privately owned land, that's excluding
That's all privately owned land. So that still excludes cities and UGAs, but that's property that people live on. That's privately owned and managed forest working lands.
It's not state forest.
No, not publicly owned. That would be the ones on publicly owned land would be things like in parks, state forests, JBLM, although, yeah, that's included in this.
Tribal land.
Tribal land, any kind of public land is gonna be separate from all the private land lumped together, which is commercial land, forestry land, houses, all that stuff.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So when you say that the working forest lands are excluded, that's specific to this map, which is
Yeah.
showing canopy restoration opportunities?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
they're not excluded
Not
from the
excluded from
overall,
the statistics?
but
Okay.
they're one of the things that essentially excluded something from being considered for restoration because they're already under an umbrella basically of care for how the forest management practices happen.
That's
So
much
they're
more
being
clear.
managed that way instead.
Commissioner Fishburne, did you have a question? Oh,
I was wondering the same thing here.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm looking at the map and there's areas that I know very well that are marked as pretty high percentage for potential restoration area, and yet I happen to know they're densely built areas. They're areas with a lot of single-family homes that are clustered together, and so I'm kind of curious about why they nevertheless are assessed with high potential restoration.
Yeah, so this potential restoration, the methodology for that has to do just more with how much existing canopy is currently there.
Okay.
So the low range is already is over 66% tree canopy. That's all that light purple area. And then the high range are areas that are less than a third tree canopy. So it is true that they might coincide with populated areas, but those are also the areas where we see a lot of conversion. So it's not necessarily getting into enough detail, like, are these sites feasible? Like, how developed is it? What are the other land uses happening there? It's just where is there room for more trees and where do trees happen already? This one's pretty straightforward in terms of that.
And
Yeah.
there's also the disclaimer here that I think is important is this also rates prairie soils and agricultural lands as low restoration
Yeah.
potential. Because we want those in those.
yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Commissioner Bartlett.
There we go. Sorry. Derek just got to one of the questions I had, which is about prairie soils. But we are still considering suburban areas or like built up areas for, I would assume we're still looking at that as the potential for some tree cover, in that there's a lot of like street side or like there's a lot of amelioration that you can do with canopy in relatively urban areas. And in fact, those are some of the areas that need that the most in terms of human habitability. So I'm guessing that some of that restoration effort is related to urban tree canopy. Am I correct on that?
Urban tree canopy would probably be a little dense. It's not quite urban because we have excluded the cities and the UGAs, but higher density, more dense development.
Yeah, there's definitely tree canopy restoration practices that can coincide with areas that are developed to a certain degree. And yeah, part of the reason that this is focused outside of UGAs is because it's not intended to be an urban tree canopy strategy or inform that kind of thing as much, because that's kind of a separate, there's different strategies and funding sources and things that go into urban tree canopy as opposed to rural. But again, I'm using that distinction there in terms of the really literal sense of cities and UGAs versus rural, not just like places that are more or less densely populated. So there still are more populated areas that probably could benefit from tree canopy restoration, as Commissioner Bartlett said.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the commissioners?
Just a comment, I appreciate, based on our feedback, how we got the hybrid chart for canopy restoration and prairie restoration. Just pretty cool. It's a little hard to read because it uses a grid of 9 colors to show, but
Call that the Bombardier map.
I really like it because what it shows is there isn't a ton of overlap between canopy restoration and prairie restoration, which was my concern. There are some areas where prairie restoration would mean removal of trees, but that's returning it to a state it should be. But that doesn't overlap a ton with where there's tree restoration going. It's further down, but yeah, it'll have like a 3x3 grid of green
Oh,
and
yes, that
yeah.
one, even more detailed,
Yeah.
yeah, than it has.
so where you see the yellowy mustard color, that's where there's potential for restoration of prairie. Where you see purple, it's trees.
Yeah.
There are some areas where it's a blend, right?
Yeah,
But
If you're
Everything
not
is really
colorblind, you see
solidly-
numbers.
purple or brown,
yeah,
With all these hexagons, doesn't that look like a board game now?
that kind of vibe.
Ego or something like that.
Mr. Hanson,
Catan.
did you want?
Catan.
Oh, this is,
Please.
just for the record, this is Kevin Hanson, hydrogeologist with the county.
Pardon for interrupting. I just wanted to note that we can now simulate tree growth throughout the county using a new generation of models that are up and running. And we also have time-stamped tree growth over time for some timestamps we can share with you as needed to further describe the sort of details and what's possible. So like if we let this area grow, this is what would happen by this year. It's a possibility that could be discussed further.
see,
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Pissinger.
I just also wanted to comment on another public comment that was made about the differences between a more complex ecosystem and a single monoculture type of planted forest. It sounds like this takes all of that into consideration. And we're not looking at monoculture forests as places where we either A, have tree canopy coverage, or B, where we would want to restore it.
The level of assessment here, I would say, would not distinguish between a mature structurally diverse forest and something that was just happened to be 7-foot high canopy.
Yeah, the
So-
only level to which that is distinguished here is basically mapped areas that are like commercial forests. So like if we have a designated area where we know commercial forestry is happening, that is included on the maps. And in some places it is taken into consideration, like the fact that they're not part of the restoration calculation. But yeah, the analysis itself from the LiDAR is not that advanced.
Yeah. Well, I guess my thought about that is, I obviously we don't have the capacity to do all of that, to make that differentiation. But I wonder if we should at least have a note about that somewhere in the report to call that out and to say that we'd like to in the future better understand that. That's A. B, I'm curious if we have any measures of board feet of timber. And I wonder whether we have any numbers or data. I know the tree companies do. The landowners in many cases do. I know my cousin spent 20 years of his career doing 3D aerial mapping, and he literally could take aerial photographs and calculate board feet of timber from them. So do we have any knowledge about what we have in Thurston County in that department?
I have no idea. And I don't think that's really our purview. We don't necessarily do timber management.
He has a comment.
Somebody does.
Do you want to take a seat over here?
Well,
I mean,
there's a spot.
yeah, no, please do.
You're welcome.
Come on.
I don't care.
You won't have-
So, last couple of
I'm not gonna
years,
be chair for much longer,
A
so.
lot of work to tree canopy partly in anticipation of potential policy choices. One of the things we did was quite a bit of research in the area of conversion of LiDAR-based tree assessments like this to board foot analysis for economics. The literature says that cannot be done with accuracy. The LiDAR-based assessments are just wrong.
Yeah.
To the extent that the foresters won't use them. I agree. And the foresters need a field survey in order to make a definitive assessment. I'm sorry, that was the extent of my question.
Related to all, go ahead.
Go, no, please.
Related to all that, do we, you just started out the whole comment about for potential policy decisions. And I'm wondering if any of you, all of you have any recommendations to us. You know, A, I know this is just an introduction here, the Tree Canopy Report, get ready for it. We're going to dive into it. But are there any policy recommendations you have for us? Like, we could do this. If we care about this, we could do this and this. Anything along those lines?
I think it'd be early to make the policy recommendations right now, but part of the work that we are, like, that's kind of part of what we're doing right now with the critical areas update.
Mhm.
So all of this does kind of feed into itself, and we have a grant from the Department of Commerce to look very specifically at like riparian management zones and how we use site potential tree height and LiDAR assessments of canopy. So we'll be able to fold all of that in and give you all information that we can use together to make recommendations to the board.
I would be interested, if you could foreshadow for us any places where, where priorities may compete, the priority of tree canopy restoration and, fire risk mitigation, and where, those things might be in conflict with each other. Any thoughts on that?
I don't have specifics on where it would happen.
If I mention forest lands conversion adaptive.
I don't think so.
Okay. So a piece of this overall work on tree conservation and restoration and forestry, and as it relates to development, is that we already have adopted a forest lands conversion ordinance, which means if people are clearing trees and not with the purpose of replanting them, as in forestry, there's certain types of permits they have to get, and it requires review, and they have to meet certain standards and provide us with maps and all kinds of stuff like that. And that's been adopted for about 1.5 years now. And we have been working on adaptive management for that. So I actually went through and reviewed a year's worth of permits under that ordinance, and then also from the year before, so that we had a comparison group. And we are currently starting to work through basically the outcomes of that and what the next steps are. And one of the questions on there that came up as a question originally from actually our implementing team was pretty much exactly that. How do we balance and manage tree protection and conversion risk mitigation and all of that with wildfire risks? So it's possible that there's work to be done to expand the code to consider that. And that would be something that, kind of similar to the CAO, would probably involve going out, doing some research, collecting some science, understanding what the recommendations are to make sure that you address both those things thoroughly, and then going and making code out of that. And we're really early, so that's like way later, probably. I don't know exactly when, but like that is one of the recommendations, at least from the adaptive management, is that we look at wildfire risk.
Yeah, and I would say there is an inherent, I think thing we can say pretty safely is is some inherent conflict between the concept of trying to keep defensible space for fire risk and trees. Those are kind of understood as inherently conflicted. I don't know if they actually are inherently conflicted. There might be certain tree species that would make sense, but really don't know. So that is a challenge.
Do we know anything about, is there any drill down or specialization in this report tied to tree canopy coverage along streams and rivers?
This one, no, but that is part of the focus of the grant that Derek mentioned.
What are the opportunities to increase tree canopy in those areas that are adjacent to private forest lands, like the Weyerhaeuser property out in South County? Sorry.
That's a good question.
Those, well, the opportunities, this doesn't really assess the opportunities. This tells us kind of where we might want to look if the county was gonna, or somebody who.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what opportunities exist? I mean, is there a way for the county to obtain those properties? Especially in South County, there's we have county parkland that's adjacent to Weyerhaeuser properties. Is there some way to obtain any of that? What's the process? What funds are available?
That's a big question. I would say most of the counties, like the property management that we do in CPED is really mostly it's for gopher mitigation for the most part. There are opportunities under Stream Flow Restoration Act, where you can, basically, it's tricky and ecology is a little bit wary of it, but there are some examples like in Whatcom County where they have purchased community forests and they manage them in a way that increases water availability, and they've gotten money from ecology to do that. So that's something that we are definitely interested in. It's a little bit tricky.
Okay, that'd be similar to like the Teanaway County forests.
Yeah, or even the Nisqually Community Forest, but they're managed for a little bit different purposes. So this one, if we were to do it, it would probably be under stream flow restoration, and we would specifically manage forests for increased groundwater availability. So, but community forests are also community assets, so.
It's also a small amount of money through conservation futures potentially be looked at. Commissioner correction.
Commissioner Day or Manager Day kind of answered this to a certain degree, but I think that one of the reasons why we had this tree canopy report done was to identify canopy restoration opportunities, but there are multiple reasons to want to restore tree canopies and multiple purposes. Are we going to go through a process of prioritizing or ranking which of these purposes is most important to us, or which one should be most important to us? Because you know, it seems like there's been a lot of talk about wanting to use this to increase water quality by replanting and repairing areas, but then we have other reasons for wanting to do this too. But is any of that going to be brought out from this particular report?
So I think the report will help us with things that we have that are like regulatory drivers. So the Stream Flow Restoration Act, we have obligations under the stormwater permits to do some level of restoration or retrofit. And if we do our planning in a detailed enough way, we could do things like restore riparian areas or even upper watershed canopy as a way to meet some of those permit requirements. So this would kind of help us understand where opportunities are. And then more than ranking, I think we'd probably be looking for places where we can stack.
Sure, you do CBA and all of them to see which ones make the most sense, but the driving factor in this is actually regulatory.
Not necessarily. There are a lot of different regulatory drivers around canopy, but canopy, I think this would have been when I wasn't here, but came about because it's an important community kind of amenity asset, something we want to manage carefully.
Eric, when you talk about stacking benefits, it makes me wonder, is there any way from this information to reduce where planting riparian areas may help to prevent sediment from coming down to the Chutes River and into the restored estuary?
I don't know that this assessment would do that, but that's something that we are interested in looking at. We have other ways we could. Yeah, Kevin probably has lots of ideas.
Well, there's a tremendous, several entities in the county, government entities have pledged tremendous amounts of money to manage sediment and butt inlet, and I continue to ask the question if some of that money could be better spent in the watershed.
I think we're
keeping things out of the river.
really interested in exploring that because it is a really large investment, and we might be able to make that investment in a way that stacks benefits.
Yeah. Mr. Pistol.
We've previously talked about wildlife corridors, and the thought occurred to me about forest tree canopy coverage would be a likely place where there would be more wildlife corridor traffic. Is there anything in this report that looks to getting over any overlapping information with, say, data from I just Fish and Wildlife track, like where large mammals travel within Thurston County based on collar tags and stuff like that? Do we have consistency? Is it along canopy covered areas, or is it not relevant?
We have the information now that I think we could compare that even visually you could because since actually most of the maps for this were created, so we didn't have it at the time. They've released the Washington Habitat Connectivity Values map. And so that actually visually displays where the most valuable habitat connectivity is in the state. And so the information exists, but it's not in this report.
Connecting all the dots.
I just like that we have this, because now it's something we can reference anytime that we take on any planning activity. We can be like, oh, does this affect either prairie restoration or?
And that's a huge point of the report. I think that's the type of thing. So there are projects that could answer some of the specific questions that have come up that could happen in the future. And once we sat down to do or start planning those projects, we get funding for something, or we embark on a new planning project and process, including the Critical Areas Ordinance, this is just great solid background information to have. We know where trees are and where they're not, and we know where other types of land cover are and where they're not. Yeah, so it forms a good background. And that's for us and anybody else who does this kind of work in Thurston County, anyone doing restoration or protection work.
I echo Commissioner Bombarder. I'm really glad that we have this, and Mr. Day referenced that, you know, this regulatory stuff drives a lot of this, but even that whole concept, which is regulatory, I believe that we should have no net loss. This is a place where, I mean, previously we have no idea whether we have any no net loss. This is a place where we can see, do we have any loss?
Yeah, and this is probably one of the canopy covers, if you think about the things that you can measure at a scale like this, is probably one of the most important things to understand how the ecosystem is functioning. It's that, it doesn't tell you everything, but it probably tells you more than anything else.
I know the percent of canopy cover in my house tells you how bad of a home plant grower I am. I'm not healthy.
Well, thank you. Any final comments from staff? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you for the questions.
Yeah, and thanks for your work on this. Oh, yeah, I see Commissioner Halverson is here as well. Thank you. Let's see, next on our agenda, continued business item number 4, work session number 6 on the Critical Areas Ordinance update.
And before we go too far, Kevin has agreed to make himself available, but I've promised to try and release him as early as possible. So if we've got some questions for Kevin, I know last time we had talked about some of that kind of interface between critical aquifer recharge areas and stormwater, and Kevin might be able to expound a bit on that if we're still interested.
I would like to hear some about that. Is Mr. Hanson also scheduled to visit us in a future agenda meeting?
Happy to whenever you need to.
What are you comfortable sharing with us now? What are you comfortable sharing with us now?
Okay, if you look at a map of Thurston County, we are wiped out with critical aquifer recharge areas. They are an absolutely dominant part of the planning regime, and very large percentage of the new construction has to deal with this issue. A part of the problem, or not the problem, but the attachment here is that of the 24,000 or so wells in the county, the vast majority of them and the super majority of their pumping comes from areas fed by critical aquifer recharge areas. In other words, they are crucial to our primary water supply. So that's a big thing. Now, recognizing this, ecology emphasized low impact development in which we recharge aquifers on site rather than letting each sheet flow off, we recharge on site. So that is extremely beneficial. In fact, we did a calculation several years ago which showed that we're actually recharging more water on a typical land development than we would have had we kept it in forest. Now, that was a very controversial finding that ecology didn't like at all. And we couldn't credit it as stream flow restoration efforts. In other words, land development was not a restoration move. But what I want to emphasize is that we are extremely aggressive and overlapping in the levels of protection that we see on the site. So speaking about, subdivision, for example, we have critical aquifer recharge areas in huge areas of North County. We also have wellhead protection areas in North County, and that is designed for water quality, but it has the net effect of preventing people from diverting water off-site. So I'm noting that we have a stack of overlapping and supporting rules, but from the standpoint of the development community, those are seen as unnecessary and repetitive, okay? But from the standpoint of the protection-minded folks, that stack is seen as insufficient. So we've got this sort of public dichotomy between what's perceived to be protection and what's actually happening in terms of land development and review. Right now, we're doing a pretty good job recharging groundwater. Our water supplies are in fairly good shape with some significant exceptions. And the real lack right now is that in aggregate, our stream flows are too low because we've essentially tapped the groundwater resource that was feeding the streams. So we've got a stream flow deficit as a result of, heavy groundwater usage. So I guess there is room to improve. I spoke to Ashley earlier in the day about this, and I wanted to just convey that the process items that cause folks to be delayed in the development process are being they're an additional protection measure, if you will. In other words, people have to go through these many steps of finding additional protection, but that takes a ton of time. In other words, it's fairly easy, rapid determination about what protection should occur. And I think that is an opportunity for speeding up the development pipeline, but it's also an opportunity to find new water. And I really want to find new water because we're short. Our streams are too low. We don't have enough fish. The habitat in the stream valleys is too warm and it's underflowing. And all 100% of the basins in Thurston County have major restrictions on water resources development, which is an indication that the groundwater feeding them is too low and it's reducing base flow, particularly for the fall run fish. So the tribes are looking for an opportunity to say, stop, you're overpumping, you're overdeveloping. So I think the chance here is, the opportunity is to simultaneously improve the amount we put into the aquifers while making the development pipeline clearer and shorter in terms of the time it takes to process applications. So I think it can be win-win, but we need to be careful because what I'm talking about is obviously right at the brainstem of our water resources. And I'm telling you, the combination of water supply and water resources is the nexus where the developers encounter the most difficulty in complying with county rules, between stormwater rules and protection of groundwater recharge. So these are my personal thoughts. I'm not speaking from a policy position, but what I see is opportunity and risk. If we get it right, it would help in both ways, but there's a real chance of running off into the rails. So I encourage you to be very, very cautious.
Understanding that overpumping is a huge issue that you have a lot of concern with, and we have to have a set of regulations for that. How big are your concerns about contaminations and the policies that we have surrounding that?
What did you say before contamination?
Critical aquifer recharge area contaminations.
Yeah. We just completed the Tri-Lakes groundwater study 3 years ago now. It showed that there were significant areas of contamination in groundwater. Septic is probably, I want to say 60 or 70% of the problem in North County. And I'm speaking primarily of North County, part of South County. So if we rely on septic, then the risk is significant. We do not have a clear picture about the human health risks of all the consumer products we found, all the chemicals we found, about the synergistic effects we found. There has not been work done on that except by Lot. And Lot did a very extensive study, and I think we ought to go back and look at that if we're gonna look further at groundwater quality and the usefulness of groundwater recharge in various ways.
You're talking about everything from microplastics to pharmaceuticals?
It's all in there. Hundreds of substances. Yeah. Yeah, but I would reassure you by saying that most of those concentrations are very low. And we do not have a clear picture that they're a huge risk, but we know they're present. What we don't know is the human health risk. That has not been evaluated yet.
It's also not, this is not just a Thurston County problem. This is quite literally a global problem.
Yes.
There are something like 89,000 toxic substances in use in commerce, and about 2,000 of those have been evaluated, and even fewer have been regulated. So there are a massive number of unregulated, really unknown toxics in commerce, in our water, everywhere.
But all of the contamination issues that we're concerned about are going to be regulated through the drainage manual, not through planning, not through the building center, not through the BDC.
If I might, if I could add the nuance that the health department has the biggest role in regulating the recharge to groundwater through septic systems. So they're part of this mix in addition to drainage manual.
I guess what I'm getting at is that this body doesn't have a whole lot of, the way I see this body doesn't have a whole lot of influence on how to implement anything that would affect this kind of contamination at this point, unless we took on a new charge of some sort, which I'm not sure exactly what it'd be, but I would certainly not be against it.
That's not necessarily the case, and we're not, you know, we do have an opportunity to go over exactly what decision points do apply for critical aquifer recharge areas when it's time for that to come through. I think February is coming. Just to provide like an example of what it looks like here, because with the CAO, it has to have a nexus to a specific development, right? The CAO is a site-specific thing. And you're right in that I think the things that apply more to the specific design of something going into a property, whether it's, you know, septic, something being constructed, are going to come more from things like stormwater manual and health department. There are still land use and CAO related things that affect what kinds of toxins might be present in or near critical aquifer recharge areas. So the example that I know of just from bringing Blacklick Quarry through and talking about it there is that there are certain mostly industrial type uses and other types of things that because they have a particular contamination risk can't be placed on critical aquifer recharge areas of a certain sensitivity. So there's all kinds of industrial processes that just from a land use standpoint can't be placed in these critical areas. And so that's the kind of thing that the CAO is able to do as it relates to these areas.
And I think that's the right way to kind of think about what we'd really be trying to do here. I don't know that we would be cranking up the dial on the stormwater manual, but we might be making choices about what types of land uses are appropriate in certain areas.
Exactly, yeah.
Agreed, that's fair.
I love your perspective and your insights. Thank you for sharing that. I hope we can have you back at a future meeting soon. You mentioned the sort of displeasure of the developers and displeasure of the environmentalists, and historically they've called that if you've equally upset them both, then you found the right balance. But I know that there's pretty important trade-offs in there, and we don't have to be at odds on everything. Sometimes we can find win-win situations. I'm probably we know how important water is. We know that many cultures believe water is life. And we know that we have seen, there have been statements by people quite wise that the wars of the future won't be fought over oil, they'll be fought over water. I was pretty dismayed to hear about some deals that were made with a local, and I know it's not in the county, it's in the county, but not in the rural county, but with a large global beverage distributor purchasing up the rights to access huge amounts of our water and then sell it right back to us. Do you have, is that something you see as concerning to dropping our groundwater levels? As that is something you don't even look at because it's within cities? Is it something, are there other things along those lines you're more concerned about?
So we have pretty good information in some areas. I have grave concerns about the ability of groundwater to continue to supply the growth requirements that we've mapped out. With a significant legal exception, which is permit exempt wells. The main water companies can't find mitigation projects. They're looking at the elapsement and complete utilization of the water rights they have. I think they're gonna use those up before we see the full growth curve. In other words, people are gonna look around and not be able to find a connection. The outlet mechanism that's legal in Washington State is permit exempt wells. Okay, you can drill it without a permit. So we could expect, I think, a surge in the use of permit exempt wells as it becomes more and more difficult to connect to a water company. So although I am encouraging of connecting to a water company in all possible cases, particularly because as soon as someone drills a permit exempt well, we have to find a way to pay for the mitigation required. And that has become extraordinarily difficult. Everybody is having a hard time finding mitigation. I think there are opportunities in the upper basin, and I want to come back to that as an option because forestry, a good healthy forest provides enormous stream flow and habitat. That's a real goal for us. So when we talk about a forest canopy study and the benefits, yes, let's go up basin because that produces the water that we need to mitigate for the growth down basin. Spending huge amounts of money down basin for tiny, tiny returns on water is not an effective use of resources. Where we can get huge amounts of water stored and utilized for lots of purposes is in the upper basins. So I really want to go there and look further at that. But to your point, I do have grave concerns. I think the cities, particularly starting with Tumwater, are in a very difficult situation. They're looking for mitigation projects. They're reaching out to us, talking about new ideas. That's good. However, I don't see where we're going to get future water. And I know from our work and our modeling that we've now drawn the water table down so far that particularly within the city of Olympia, we're going to start looking at inshore migration of the saltwater front and saltwater intrusion and land subsidence, particularly on the easily compacted fill within the lower parts of the city of Olympia. So yes, I do have grave concerns. We could do more with analyzing that, and that's something that I very much want to do. Sorry to go on such length.
Thank you so much for that. When you say up basin, are you referring to upland areas that are up above 1,000 feet in elevation or other areas?
Well, I'm talking specifically about the Upper Deschutes Basin,
Okay.
upstream of Lake Lawrence.
Yep.
I think that's a tremendous opportunity, and we ought to talk further with the forestry companies and talk about what could be done. Capital Land Trust has recently signed an agreement with Port Blakely to hold forest from 40 years to 80 years of age. I think that's a breakthrough agreement. I think we ought to find out more about that agreement because it speaks to the question of how can we keep forests to be older, which provide a host of stack benefits that Derek alluded to.
It strikes me that, you know, the Chehalis River has a major flooding problem and they have a giant task force that's been working for more than 10 years to try to figure out what the hell they're going to do about their floodplain and their proclivity for flooding. How the heck can we not access some of that?
Well, that's been talked about. You know, they have that LAND, the land option study that was done for the whole basin really, in concert with the dam option, the land option, and deals with something like how much land do you need if you can saturate a couple of feet of soil to make the equivalent storage of $1 billion dam. Well, for $1 billion, you can buy a lot of land and store a lot of water in that soil.
It's fantastic. I know when former Senator Fraser was here with us talking about water issues, she mentioned their research into the potential of building reservoirs of any type or form, underground, in ground, behind a dam, et cetera. And there was a lot of interest in that potential. Do you see any potential for that in Thurston County?
Yes, I think we ought to explore that further. I think she alluded to a host of technologies which could be evaluated in a feasibility study. I'd very much like to get a big feasibility study, particularly working with the other towns that are facing the kinds of challenges. I mean, if they're going to absorb our growth, we need to help them find mitigation.
You talked about forests as a way to recharge aquifers. Is there much exploration of prairie soils and increasing the carbon in prairie soils as a way to hold more water? I think I've seen the number of, for every 1% increase in soil carbon, you get an additional 25,000 gallons of water that could be held per acre in the top, what is it, 12 inches or something?
Yeah, and take the Scatter Creek Valley, there's what I'll call a headspace. The distance between the water table and the ground surface is very large. Okay, that's storage capacity that we could use. And in the dry parts of the year, that's 30 feet thick in some areas.
Yeah.
That's 30 feet of additional water. Okay, at a 25% porosity, we can store maybe, I don't know, let's say 7 feet of additional water. 7 feet over the entire Scatter Creek Valley is a stupendous amount of water, and it will provide a lot of fish flow at the same time. So I think, yes, that is an option. I think you're right. Those deep prairie soils are fantastic at holding water. Let's make use of them.
Is there any talk of restoration projects to manage those areas in such ways as to increase soil carbon? Because I think stacked benefits, again, taking carbon out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, getting into the soils, and then we get to hold more water. Is this realistic?
Biological growth is the way to produce that. So that vegetation.
Yeah, we actually, so the folks at the WSU Extension know quite a bit about that. We've had conversations. I will say, I think we are getting a ways into our geologically hazardous areas time. I could.
That's so fascinating.
We do have this coming up.
Go ahead.
We're gonna have more time with you in January. So perhaps we ought to get to our.
Well, I've blown the schedule, so I really
Thank you so much. Chair's prerogative. I will say that I was on a study tour of industrial symbiosis projects in Denmark this late summer, and they were, everywhere we went, they talked about water issues, and that it was very interesting. I learned the term processed water, which I'd never heard before, but they use groundwater for the things that has to be groundwater, and then they recycle the water from industry and whatnot to use in things that doesn't have to be groundwater. And I wonder if that's an avenue that we can go down as well. And instead of taking water, using it for something, and then flushing it down to lot or putting it back through a septic system, if we can find ways to clean and recycle and reuse the water multiple times.
I will say that the way that water law works is based on some really antiquated ideas and technology and assumptions. And
it's yours.
There's, if you can get to it, well, if you got to it first, it's yours. And like how much water we use, usually it sets like how much a household is gonna use is kind of like a given. That's a dial that you can turn. So there, like in the future, as water becomes scarcer, I think there will probably be like statewide efforts to look back at Washington water law and the assumptions and really allow for more creative solutions. Right now, it's in very, very early days of what do we do about the fact that we've pumped too much water as a society.
Is that the conversation that's gonna turn into metering permit exempt wells? And whether that's gonna be done with a stick or a carrot?
That would be that's kind of the first step down. How much water are we using? What types of water should we be using? Do you restrict the outdoor watering that people are allowed to do, and how do you do it? There are assumptions around how much water people are using, but it is very, very early days, and I don't know that the pressure has been sufficient to unlock the real creative solutions.
Los Angeles is planning to start drinking recycled sewage, so that. It's always options.
It's the same as their water already tastes.
I'm hoping we don't reach that point here.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
There is a project coming up between Lot and I think South Puget Sound Brewing and Distilling Center to brew beer using recycled.
Shoots River Brewery makes reclaimed water beer.
They do currently?
They have in the past.
Budweiser.
Okay, there.
It's a commercial.
You have the con.
Right before I jump into this, I just want to say that I got a message from our lovely staff member Tasha to say that she did do some improving to the SEO. So when you Google Thurston County Tree Canopy, you should actually get.
All right.
So
That
thank
is
you, Tasha.
service. I like it.
I don't know how to do that, so I appreciate it. Okay, so on to geologically hazardous areas, best available science and discussion. This presentation is really gonna be geared towards sharing what the information out there is, diving deeper into background for this type of critical area. This is one of our 5. And setting up some discussion points so that after this, when we start to go look at the code itself and really start making choices, we've had a little pre-discussion and we know what some of our priorities are. Sorry, okay. So we're gonna go over the functions and values, and especially for this type of critical area, the hazards associated with it, and we'll look at a little bit of how they're affected by climate change, talk about the key strategies that get used to protect these areas, and then get into the discussion points. So in the whole umbrella of geologically hazardous areas, this is what we currently have defined in our code as the types of geologic hazards out there. So there are landslide, erosion, marine bluff, seismic, volcanic, and mine hazard. Erosion hazard areas are primarily defined by soil type, so areas that have been listed and mapped to have high erosion susceptibility. Landslides can be defined in a combination of factors, but generally they're steep slopes. They have certain types of soils that are prone to sliding. There's groundwater present that might be destabilizing the slope, high groundwater. And areas that we've seen that we know have slid before or have evidence of past landslides. For marine bluff areas, these are primarily in our shoreline areas and they're therefore primarily managed by the Shoreline Management Program, but the CAO does have some things to say about them as well. These are slopes and banks near essentially marine shorelines. Seismic hazard areas are characterized by areas where the soil has particular quality that makes it likely to undergo liquefaction in an earthquake, which is kind of the worst thing it can do in an earthquake. It is what it sounds like. The soil essentially starts acting like liquid, which is not good for structures on it in that earthquake scenario. Volcanic hazard areas have less to do with the ground underneath and more to do with the big, beautiful mountain that we have nearby. These are areas where a lahar might flow out of Mount Rainier in some scenarios. For Thurston County, this is primarily along the Nisqually River because it comes off that mountain. Lava and water will probably flow in about the same places. And then mine hazard areas are primarily relating to places where mines have been dug underground, but just if you're building on top of mine shafts, openings, or other features where the ground underneath has actually been hollowed out, sometimes that can bring structural issues to the soil you're building on.
So on the flyer here, it says that geologically hazardous areas are places where naturally occurring earth processes have the potential to cause serious damage to people, property, or the environment. Mine hazard areas get listed in this. Struggling to understand what about mine hazard areas are naturally occurring earth processes?
Yeah. So the language in the actual code. Yeah.
Generally.
Generally, yes. It is true that mine hazard areas are kind of unique here in that they're pretty much primarily caused by human activity, but even then, some of the processes that determine whether or not it is actually hazardous would still relate to things like the structure of the soil. And also, the language in the code is more specific about actually what constitutes those hazardous areas, as opposed to the fact sheet is just our digestible language, short summary.
Just the comments about the volcano and the, lava and whatnot. I was here, I lived in Vancouver, Washington when Mount St. Helens blew up, and it doesn't quite work that way. We're not in Hawaii. We don't have molten rivers of red rock going down. We have lahar is when you have an instant melting of all the snowpack, and it turns then all the soil into liquefaction, like you say, and runs down the river. What we had in the case of Mount St. Helens was an enormous amount of water coming down every river. That water was filled with trees that had been knocked down and wiped out. And then they wipe out every bridge that it go past. They wipe out every infrastructure that's along the river. They scour the river. They leave ash. I mean, the rivers in South Central Washington and Southern Washington are just still to this day, you can see ash fields along many of those rivers. They wiped out bridges all along the I-5. They wiped them out all over the place going out to the Columbia. So it's more a function of less about lava and more about ash, very quickly melting snow melt and icebergs and other things that cause big impacts.
Yeah, and just to share maybe a little more detail about how lahar hazard areas are designated, they come from specific hazard scenario maps. I don't think that, and that's just me remembering off the top of my head, so you can find them online. I believe the US Geological Survey publishes those maps, but you see Mount Rainier with all these rays basically coming off it, where generally follow the rivers. Some of those are red, which means almost any eruption situation is going to cause some kind of dangerous flow there. Ours are more in the yellow category, which means there are certain eruption scenarios that would cause a lahar, but there are also other scenarios where maybe it's not overflowing molten mud and fire and all that, but there's different scenarios that can happen. Yeah.
In our current CAO, how many of these hazard areas are already regulated?
All of these.
Including volcanic hazards is already regulated? And is there, what is the current building development restrictions for volcanic hazard areas?
It tends to be more for critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we don't stop people from necessarily building homes in these areas, and there are a lot of communities that are on them. Hoarding is a good example.
Okay.
Things like that. So yeah, you wanna look at that if you're gonna build or buy there. I know I certainly would, but the Critical Areas Ordinance is gonna look more at things like, don't put a police station there, don't put a nursing home there or a
Okay.
hospital, things
Yes.
like that.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
that
critical
makes a lot of sense.
infrastructure. And actually, I think it is for volcanic specifically. And this is a tool that is on actually later, we can talk about a little bit more, but there are certain hazards where we actually had people record something with the auditor so that if someone comes in to buy their property later, they know they're buying a property in a lahar hazard area.
So when it comes to like a seismic hazard and seismic faults, would the same apply there, that it's not so much for private development, but then we do things like buy the Plum Street for $35 million to move this facility down there right on top of that fault. How do we do?
Well, fault versus the liquefaction.
Yeah.
So like that far back.
You're not
away from
making
the
me feel
south.
better.
I mean, we're not regulating.
It might be defined differently.
Yeah, I don't think we're regulating for ground opening or shaking or
That's
anything like that.
City of Olympia's CAO that we're working under there.
Ability
Yeah.
thing, right?
More about the stability of the soil in an earthquake scenario, and that actual process of liquefaction. So it's defined in a way. I don't know the details of that
Yeah.
project.
All right.
It's why they build certain buildings downtown are on stilts, built, pounded into the bedrock because of downtown Olympia is fill, but you move far enough back from the sound and you hit bedrock, and it's somewhere around like Fifth Avenue.
You look at all
You can
the
see it.
blinds and windows and then they kind of go down.
Yeah.
My dad was the mayor of Ording, and every single city council meeting they ever had, they had to discuss the topic of, can they afford to build a $7 million to $30 million bridge to get all the school kids out of the lahar zone within 30 minutes or less.
They're surrounded on both sides. The whole city limits is but 2 rivers that come off the mountain. I know about the bridge. I think they're gonna build it.
I don't think they are.
Next year.
Are there any geological hazards that our guidance
Yeah.
document from the state say we should consider that we are not considering?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that the guidance pretty much focuses on these ones, yeah. So functions and values, I think when it comes to geologic hazards, as we've already heard, a lot of the focus is on life safety and hazards and that type of thing. They do also provide ecological functions and values. So when we consider regulations, there are still ecological functions we meet no net loss for. So a lot of erosion hazard areas, landslide hazard areas, coastal bluffs, these overlap with areas like riparian areas, habitat. They're interfacing between land and water. So they do things like provide sediment, sometimes in a beneficial way, like in natural processes, sediment is important to stream morphology and habitat. But when it happens, when those processes are disturbed, that erosion can become harmful to those habitats. Vegetation is a key factor in maintaining erosion that is healthy and not too fast or too heavy for those habitats. We also see things like feeder bluffs with marine bluffs. So those are areas that actually provide sand to beaches from the land side and maintain beach environments and provide that important sediment. I just want to make sure there's nothing else to note here, but those are the primary functions that we see. So habitat, proper sediment provision, and then just the role of these areas as sometimes overlapping with other important features like riparian areas. So for hazards and safety, the types of risks that exist in these areas are things like ground failures, landslides, earthquake liquefaction, lahar flows. So these are things that the earth can do that essentially destroys things that we build on it. And that's where things become a true hazard or disaster, because risks exist in the environment all over the place. It becomes an issue when human development overlaps with those hazards in a way that is not safe and isn't managed properly. Yeah.
We go back one slide to functions and values. So I'm just a little curious about when we talk about the values and the positives, they can be beneficial, erosion can be beneficial or harmful. Other things you were mentioning as well. And I immediately think of then ash that flowed in from Mount St. Helens explosion. I think about lava, and lava is actually considered ideal as it breaks down. It's ideal for soil and food productivity. It's ideal growing medium. Ash is not by itself, but ash does have some positive qualities. Like you stick it in a car engine in the radiator and the air intake, it's a massive problem. You stick it into soil, it can help aerate soil. It does provide some functions. So, you know, we're not exactly politicians, but we deal with that side of things. And naturally, politicians look for what are our resources? What do we have in large volume that's inexpensive for us? How can we best utilize that for our community? How can we make the most of that? And it just seems to me, we have these things so close to us that are not being really utilized much. I mean, would it be valuable to us to improve our biological function of some of our land here in Thurston County by shipping up ash from central Washington? I don't know. Would it be valuable for us to use any other resources that are nearby, like was just mentioned with the water coming from Chehalis River and that valley, that Waira? So I just think we ought to maybe look a little bit just beyond our borders to nearby neighboring areas where we may have some resources that could be incredibly valuable to us. And I'm not just talking about cranberries from Prince Edward County.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of regional factors at play. The CAO doesn't have necessarily the scope to address that kind of thing. What we can do is make sure that if there are flows, earthquakes, lahars, ash, all that happening, that development is regulated properly so that when that event interacts with someone's home that was permitted in Thurston County, it is not a serious life safety issue, or at least to the degree feasible. Yeah.
Like Harry Truman.
Climate change is something that the best available science has information about how it can affect geologically hazardous areas. It's not immediately obvious because this is all processes that's happening with mostly inorganic material underground. But some things that do impact this are an increased intense rainfall events, more surface water, especially for erosion areas and landslide hazard areas, pulling on and destabilizing soil or causing more erosion. Sea level rise can destabilize marine bluff areas. Basically what happens is as more water comes in if you picture a bluff over the water, that water is coming in and essentially carving out underneath that bluff. And then you can picture how that might start to fall down. Channel migration along streams and rivers has a similar effect. So water is moving to where it wasn't before, and that can be influenced by a variety, is its own natural process, can also be influenced by climate change, but still is something that the best available science is recommending that we consider is the full breadth of a channel migration zone. So where a river could move in the future, because it could erode underneath cliffs and slopes on the sides of that. We also see a lot of issues coming up with increased wildfire events, increased intensity of wildfire events, because that contributes to vegetation loss, and vegetation loss being a huge deal for runoff, erosion, and slope stability in terms of landslides.
Okay, Commissioner Bartlett.
Thank you. Something that just struck me about that was we just had this conversation about saltwater integration from water loss from the lower the water table, and it occurs to me that that will combine in a lot of troubling ways with the rising levels overall. And I'm wondering if there's anything about mapping that takes into account these ideas like this land swamp and these other hazards that we're looking at, increased vulnerability of certain areas to water.
We can't quite, we're picking
Make
up
that
about
out.
70% of what you're saying, I think.
Never mind.
I think he was talking about saltwater inundation that
Saltwater
Nancy was referring to.
Yeah, saltwater intrusion.
I think that has implications for the stability of, yeah.
Since that it causes problems, especially with where the infill was, that's very likely to be compacted by the
Yeah,
infiltration.
the subsidence alongside saltwater.
Do we have any of that in the county, or is it all within the cities?
I think most of it would probably be in the cities, but there might be some limited.
Some pockets.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to the point about vegetation loss and wildfires. It's not just vegetation loss that's a concern with wildfires. Our friends on the other side of the mountains and more recently on this side of the mountains, we're seeing really destructive debris flows that happen after wildfires. These aren't like a normal mudslide. These can pick up boulders and move them at 35 miles an hour. Like, it can get really scary, and it can impact areas that you typically wouldn't, like where your trees and stuff in that area would normally stop something like that from happening. So just another thing to start thinking about. I know the US Geological Surveys put out some data on that, and DNR did some stuff on that last year too. But
To the wildfire though, that doesn't really feel like a huge Western Washington problem. So how are we regulating development because of wildfire now? And how are we thinking we might do it in the future?
didn't we just have an absolutely massive wildfire on this side of the mountains for the entire summer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's here now.
I disagree, it's not a much. I disagree with it's not.
Yeah, it's coming. We have this huge biomass on the ground And as the climate is drying out, water resources are diminishing, we're heading into a era.
So you think the Cushman issue is gonna be more
Yeah, it's
prevalent down
gonna
here?
be more normal. We're gonna see it in Capitol Forest, we're gonna see it in other places.
Yeah, and this is one of those points where this is a policy like decision, because currently there's not much in the code about wildfires or the increased risk that they present. But if we see that as a change that's coming and a priority, there's things that we can adopt into code that consider a history of wildfire as part of the definition for what constitutes a potentially hazardous area or something like that.
But I think primarily, isn't it here because we're talking about things that could exacerbate
Yes,
the actual
this
hazard?
is what the
of
science is
fire?
saying. So even if we consider or don't consider wildfires in detail in the code, this is just the discussion of what the science is discussing as far as things that are related to climate change that are exacerbating these hazards or changing how they occur.
All right, I'm still having a hard time thinking how that would affect our development codes, since that's what this whole, you know, this whole exercise is about, how we're gonna affect our development codes.
So, two like examples and that I can think of based off of my reading in the science would be, for example, with channel migration, mentioning and including channel migration zones, which are delineated areas near streams and rivers that can be mapped, and using those to say inform the definition of an erosion hazard area. That's an option. And same thing with the wildfires. So like our definitions for landslide hazard and erosion hazard areas include specific site criteria. For landslides, one of those is history of past landslides. It is possible to tack onto that something like recent history of wildfire, or that type of thing. Again, these aren't really set in stone. I'm just doing kind of a thought exercise to help explain where these things come in. That's the type of thing where the science can have a nexus into the development code.
Just to add, the Bear Gulch fire was near Cushman. This side of the mountains, it burned for 5 months and destroyed, well, it burned 20,000 acres of land.
Did it destroy any human development?
No.
No, not particularly. They detected it, but yeah, it hit a lot of forest lands.
And it burned for that long because it was inaccessible.
Yeah.
In many ways.
If we had something like that in the Capitol Forest, we might be able to contain it a little better, but
We don't have a lot of human development in Capitol Forest, though.
it still potentially,
So
those
the
water,
I would differ.
a debris flow that started in a watershed there could be really damaging.
Yeah.
That's the issue. The elevation, like areas that would never normally landslide after a fire and a heavy rain could debris flow in a way that could be really dangerous.
I mean, look on the bright side, it also makes for good mushroom hunting.
It's true. I heard it.
It's for really expensive homeowners insurance.
You know that Hagen is selling morels for $550 a pound? Wow. Sure, how many might be a job.
Very focused on the agenda here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so to focus back in on actually what the code can do, to look a little bit at protection and permitting strategies. So generally what these look like are site-specific, project-specific hazard mitigation and avoidance. And depending on the geohazard present, the type of specific area that is and the type of development being proposed, this can look different. So like for earlier examples, if we're looking at seismic and volcanic areas and we're trying to build a nursing home children's hospital of some kind, that's not going there, and that's just a full avoidance type of thing. This is not allowed in this area. You are avoiding the hazard for critical infrastructure, versus something like someone wants to build near the top of a slope because they like the view. They go get a site assessment. They make sure they're outside of a certain risk area, a certain buffer that we establish in the Critical Areas Ordinance, and that they have the proper types of engineering present on site to make sure that's the case. Or like Andy's example of buildings in downtown Olympia that are built on stilts to accommodate what the actual engineering quality and stability of that ground underneath them is. A big way that we can facilitate that process for people coming in for permits is using really up-to-date mapping. That's what our next meeting is gonna be on. Washington DNR has really exciting LiDAR-based landslide maps that provide that criteria for landslide hazard areas, that is like things that have a history of landslides. We have that in super high resolution detail. They're very detailed, they're very exciting. And that's gonna give us a way clearer image of like who is on a true landslide hazard versus who is near a steep slope or something that might have some of the characteristics of a landslide hazard area. Awareness for property owners is another strategy. As I mentioned, for certain types of geohazards, we require that people record information with the auditor's office. We could expand that tool if it's of interest or not. If it's not, that's a question that we can explore. A big one is for especially landslide hazard areas, the level of geological investigation that we ask people to do. And this is where a lot of folks get hung up in the permit process. This is something I've had our implementing staff ask us to discuss, ways to provide relief to folks. There are multiple levels of investigation that can be done on a site. It's anything from a 2-page letter to a 45-page engineering report. There are certain projects that probably just need that letter. They know clearly where it is. Maybe we can use the new DNR landslide map. They're a certain distance away from it. And a geologist has gone out and confirmed in a brief letter to us that they are not concerned about critical areas on the site, and the project moves on, versus something that is dealing either much closer to, or they're getting an RUE to be within the buffer of a geohazard area. That is going to need serious engineering report and a deeper level of investigation to make sure that development is still safe, even if it's doing something like getting a reasonable use exception. So that's a big point. Anything coming in that is getting a geohazard related, especially landslide and erosion hazard related permit with us, is doing some level of geological investigation. Some level of geologic reporting to ensure that that's safe. And related to that is just transparency and consistency, setting forth clear expectations for what levels of investigation, what levels of reporting are going to be required, making it clear what tools we're using to identify critical areas is already a broad project that I know our geodata team has been working on, and that will play into this as well, as far as how the code references and defines critical areas. How we reference maps and data is important to the code, and being able to make sure that in the future we're able to keep that up as new data comes out, and that people know what we're looking at, so that it's easy and clear to them. Okay, well, if something shows up on this map on my property, I know I have to do this, this, and this. And building as much transparency into that process as possible, because I think a lot of people get surprises, or they have to come in and have a 20-minute conversation like you all did with our example with Natalie, to even figure out, okay, well, do I need to hire a geotech or do I not? And building as much clarity into that as possible is really going to alleviate some of that permitting stress that people go through, while still protecting the areas.
Commissioner Halverson, did you have a comment?
That's the face of a man looking for the unmute button.
My hand wasn't raised, I don't believe.
Oh, okay. I saw a movement up there, some kind of
Adjusting
a
its camera.
signal.
No,
Kind of fly.
just
Thank you.
listening.
Thank you very much. Oh, Commissioner Pistinger.
So going back to the slide before, prior to climate change, and I'm reading also in this document, the bottom paragraph, it says, another important aspect for regulating geologic hazards is planning for the effects of climate change. And that's part of the hazard mitigation plan. So is that what this section is in here for? Is that's what we try to do, is calculate and figure out what impacts climate change will have on some of these other things and what our strategies are?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just that climate change is present in the guidance and the best available science. We know it's something that can impact, and as we talked about, there are specific specific connections to the things that the critical area ordinance regulates, what we ask people to do when they get permits. And that's the intention of considering climate change in this portion of, in this stage of development for the code, is just to recognize it as one of the factors, the natural processes and factors that impacts this critical area.
Thank you. So I think Commissioner Bartlett was trying to ask about the idea of the saltwater infiltration, which really is less of a climate change thing, although certainly sea level rise would impact that, and more of an impact of human impact on lowering the water table by a heavy amount of water usage everywhere else, lowering the in-stream flows and things like that, lowering the water table. So it seems like that should almost be its own section, and there should maybe be some other things like human caused changes and other things that come to my mind in that type of a category. You list here vegetation loss and wildfires. I presume that's lost trees from a burn or other vegetation from a burn, but you know, we have deforestation where we choose to just clear cut something. That's a human caused, right, impact to the environment. We have other things that we are doing through development, through other processes that are causing effects to our environment. So I would think we maybe ought to have another page or section in here about that, human caused changes or something along those lines, if it makes sense.
Well, I would say that the intent of the code section as a whole and of the whole review of the code is to ensure that when human changes to the environment are happening, they are not causing loss, risk, or damage in these areas. And so that is sort of the overarching purpose. I mean, that's what that no net loss is. And so in a hazard related area like this, it's no net loss of those ecological functions. So don't clear vegetation off the slope off of your property is probably the most obvious example. Or if you're building near that slope, put more vegetation on it so that it remains stable and safe. And that also then in turn backs up human health and safety as well. But I'd say the whole code section is geared towards, because again, the Critical Areas Ordinance needs to have a nexus to a specific development. So we can't necessarily address the total of development impacts. So like with the example of saltwater infiltration. But what we can do is on a site specific level, make sure that that new construction is not worsening those impacts. And it's, then like we've discussed, like the no net loss line is kind of tricky, and like it's hard to know whether we're really achieving no net loss. We are hoping to do some work on that that's not related to zero, that's more programmatic. So there's other work that can be done outside the CAO to look at that. But as far as what this can do, it's that site specific, no net loss, no impact to these critical areas. Okay, so these are some starting discussion points, and obviously anything else that is important to you all that you're curious about, that you want us to focus on or look at, that's within the scope of the ordinance, we can. These are what jumped out to us with the Best Developed Science review. So that safety and flexibility, understanding what levels of investigation go where and what the role of engineers is. If an engineer says something is okay and safe and not causing loss, but we have it mapped in a specific area, what do we do with that situation? That's a question that comes up at the permitting counter with some of these areas, especially because they are safety oriented. Well, my engineer says it's safe, why can't I do it? Tools for awareness, so the option of having people record acknowledgements that they are in or near hazard areas. That currently is just for Lahar areas. If there's any interest in expanding that to other types of hazards so that people have an increased awareness of what's happening with their properties, we'll talk about that. And then the use of new science and data tools, that's primarily the new LiDAR data, and then just making sure that the code can reference those tools for transparency and consistency.
When you're asking people to acknowledge living in these hazard areas, what is the kind of pushback that you're getting from people? Are people afraid that that acknowledgement might affect their insurance rates, or have you gotten any pushback from people when you've asked them to sign these acknowledgements?
Not that I'm aware of. I sat down with some folks who are on our implementing current planning team side, and that was not something that they mentioned receiving pushback on.
Do you think is the primary purpose of having these acknowledgements to make sure the applicant knows of them, or is it cover for the county to say, we told you so?
I think it could serve both of those functions.
And I think also probably to inform future prospective buyers.
Because we'll show up on a permit
Yeah,
record.
it's a lot more about that next person coming in.
Okay.
Do they know that their house might get washed away by hot ash or not?
So we could even have these for marine bluffs or anything along those lines.
Yeah, and that one's gonna be a little more obvious. I think some of these are visually, you know, if your house is on top of a marine bluff, probably costs a lot of money because of it. But you don't necessarily know what the Lahar flow path for Mount Rainier is, or that it comes all the way into Thurston County, or that the soil underneath you has a seismic liquefaction risk. So they serve different purposes relating to different areas.
Commissioner Kaiser.
Somehow I'd like to see us acknowledge, and I'm not sure how we do it, the fact is that we can do the very best work. We can use the best available science. We can be assiduous, but we cannot necessarily defend against all of these hazards. I'm thinking of that marine bluff. Sooner or later, that bluff is going down. It will collapse. And whether it's tomorrow or 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, it's really hard to tell. And so you can have the vegetation there and you can do all the right things, but ultimately there's forces here that.
Gravity.
Yeah, so somehow I want to convey that reality, not make it a point where we just throw up our hands and say, oh, we can't do anything anyway, so it's not worth, but somehow we have to acknowledge that somewhere in the text.
Yeah, that can be done in the text, and that's also pretty much exactly what that acknowledgement tool does.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is a feature of your property, at some point it will present a risk.
Yeah.
You just found the crux of the critical areas.
So slide.
Yeah.
Last time, that's a good example, like, unless you want to avoid building within a mile of a slope that is constructed that way, you're not going to avoid that hazard completely. You can't remove that.
Although now we have better mapping and you could see a better, I know at the time they didn't really have the historical mapping data, and now it's clear that for hundreds and thousands of years, that's been a slide slope, but people didn't know it.
Exactly, and so that's what's so exciting about that DNR map is we can tell people very confidently and transparently, which is really what people want.
Yeah, they can make their own.
Yes, this is a landslide area. We know it because it's on this map and you can see the shape of the scarp and the fall and everything.
But we've had the concept of you're in 100-year flood zone and people build like crazy and they don't slow them down one iota.
It's true. You see, look at the Chehalis Basin. Look what's going on I-5 right along where all that flooding was. I mean, sort of like,
FEMA's not going to save you. Some of those are very old choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't, the critical areas ordinance, we don't allow the 100-year floodplain for new homes. That's a big no-no. But in the 500-year, yes, because there's a certain probability that we have to, as a society and as a political body, deem acceptable.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the policy questions come in.
I'm a little curious. You had mentioned in your comments how sometimes these geological reports that folks bring in range anywhere from 2 to 45 pages long. And is that length or the level of detail dictated by the situation? And is it like categorized? I'm just curious how staff at the county determine what level is needed.
I think a lot of what it boils down to in the determinations happening at the counter is, especially for landslide hazard areas, there are lists of criteria that define, is this a landslide hazard and is it not? And a lot of the difficulty comes in at how much investigation does it take to actually determine whether you meet those criteria. Some of the criteria are more obvious, like this is a 40% slope, which is a very steep slope as far as things go. But there are other things like a combination of a less steep slope and certain other types of features in the landscape. And so how much geological investigation do you need to do to know what is actually present as a hazard? And this is where something like the DNR maps come in, where some of those we might actually be able to answer mostly by looking at that map. So if you have it on the map and you know exactly where it is, and your geologist goes out and writes you a 2-page letter and says, your development is far enough from this mapped feature, that's a lot quicker than having someone go out and actually individually study and perform an analysis on the history of slides or the subsurface structure of the soil on that site.
I guess what I was getting to is like trying to put myself in a member of the public who wants to build in an area. Like, how clear is it coming in, how much detail they're gonna need? Is it a thing where it becomes this like escalating more and more thing? Or is it fairly clear after a look at the map, like, oh, you're going to need these 5 things, it'll be roughly 10 pages, you need to talk to a geological specialist for these things? Like, is it a clear thing when they come in, or is it one of these ever-evolving things that takes a really long time?
I think
Or
it
is unclear?
towards that, because I don't believe, and this is my memory of the form that we hand people, but that they need a report, and Natalie, you can jump in and correct me at any time. That they don't need a report to submit the critical areas review permit. And then that they get that information from the reviewing planner after that's been submitted. Is that right, Natalie? Or do you know?
Yes, so in order to submit your critical area review permit, a geotechnical report is not required. However, at the time, say it is determined that a report is needed, we indicate that a report is needed. However, based on our existing tools that we currently have, we can't give any specificity as to how long or how detailed a report needs to be. At that point, it kind of is now in the hands of the geotechnical expert as to what extent is truly needed in order to determine how safe the proposal is on the site.
Sounds really squishy.
It is squishy, and I think that's led to some of the issues that we hear from folks in the public about the implementation of the ordinance. They get frustrated because they don't understand the limitations always that we are working with and trying to you know, carry out the ordinance. But that's the goal that we're trying to have here, is increase that transparency where we can and put out that menu of it may be from this point to this point that you need. And some of that is in the ordinance and some of it is in the implementation guidance that we're gonna prepare and do the best we can to have these things bucketed out and be able to explore with people. But you can't always tell someone as soon as they come in exactly what they need. You have to look at the data that we have, and it's not always clear cut. But we're gonna do the best we can to promote that transparency. That's a stated goal of the whole update.
Yeah, I could see how that could be really frustrating if you're not given any details, so you have no idea how much information you need to produce. In my mind, I think of, and this is very pie in the sky, but like if you go to your dealership, right, for your car, and they do your whatever point checkout, right, and some things are red and some things are yellow. Like if you could just say like, these are the red things that your person needs to address. These are yellow things, right? Like, it would be nice to have information on this type of thing, just so they know, like, have an idea of what all they need to address with their geological, because I can't imagine it's easy to get and pay for one of these folks. And if they turn it in and it's insufficient, they have to do it again. That could get really discouraging.
I couldn't find it, but one of us probably still has it. But our geotechnical engineer, I couldn't find my copy of it.
One in my desk.
He drew a
I studied
picture
it
of how we'd like to be able to lay it out. And he literally drew a picture of it.
It's a really neatly little hand-drawn, written out, and that's actually what
It's not a decision matrix.
It is a description of the levels of geological investigation and
Okay.
when they're important. And so that's someone we have on staff who knows that and like can help us inform like how we make that transparent.
We're really lucky we actually have a geotechnical engineer on staff. That's not a normal thing.
Hazards everywhere.
So if somebody brings in a geotech report, are you guys scrutinizing that report, or you?
Yes, we are reviewing all the geotech reports. That's not a normal thing. But Mark Beaver from our team, I think he has 5 that he's working on right now. So he spends probably almost half of his time.
Here next time.
I'll be here.
I thought as a policy, we did not second guess professional reports brought in by the applicant.
If we don't have, like, essentially, that's usually like you want like equivalent credentials before you start questioning.
And since you have a really great geotech, you're gonna.
And because it's specifically life and safety versus a wetland report, it's important to that wetland and the creatures that live there, but that's
That's fair point.
human health and safety.
And there are some that come in that probably deserve some scrutiny.
I believe that.
Deserve some what?
Scrutiny. Deserve some scrutiny.
Thank you.
Geotech report by Chat GTP.
Let's just hallucinate some code references for you. This is great.
Yeah.
Guys, you're pissing.
I's are dotted and T's are crossed.
I'm curious, as we now are talking about lowering our water table and related impacts, whether we have any indication. I've never heard of this historically in Thurston County, sinkholes. Have we started to experience any of them? Actually, they're associated with a number of different factors, but lowering the water table is definitely one of them. Do we know anything about sinkholes? And if they did, would they be under landslides or erosion?
But not that I know of. I
Actually,
don't-
maybe
Great
landslides
question
is
for
the
next
ground
time when
failure,
DNR's here.
but
Yeah.
yes, I am not aware of any issues with sinkholes.
Mark probably knows.
Washington's DNR's FAQ states we have had very few, if any, sinkholes in the entire state. Our geology is not prone
Just
to it.
not a sinkhole.
Limestone.
Well, I imagine if you want to build a house next to a sinkhole, you're probably not making decisions anyway. So
You know, yeah.
I see on your map, I mean, on your calendar that we have critical aquifer recharge area concepts on January 7th. Is that still the plan?
That's the plan.
Can we make a formal request for Mr. Hanson to join that meeting?
I would love for him to be here. Yeah, so to the calendar, to that point, we have just finished up geologic hazard areas concepts. Next time, we will be looking at DNR. They are confirmed that they've confirmed they're gonna come present with us to talk about those landslide maps and how they can be used, and also have both DNR and Mark Beaver, our geologist, our geotech,
Wait, we
answer
have a
questions.
Mark Beaver
Yes.
and a David Trout.
well, David doesn't.
A little on the nose for, no. it's just-
David was nominal determinism. Mark.
And we have public lands commissioner at the state, his last name is Up the Grove.
When I worked at Fish and Wildlife, there was someone named Wolf Dammers.
Checking news archives for Thurston County, the last mention of a sinkhole in Thurston County was a sinkhole that opened up in Bakota in 2010. It turned out to be like a culvert that caused the issue to rush out part of the road.
If it's in the city, we don't have to worry about it for the critical.
Not our department.
It was in the middle of the road and it was like smaller than the space between our two desks.
So that's it. Any final notes or comments or questions?
You good there?
Alrighty.
Going in.
Staff update.
We don't have any staff updates at this point.
Remember what was staff update last meeting?
Yes, I do remember what staff.
Do you have updates on that?
We're working on it. We're gonna figure it out. So, it's,
Keep talk.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked to the board's office, but board's office is not our office, so.
I heard a unofficial notice from the county commissioners that they're all, out of respect to every opening, trying to hold an open application process. And they're doing it for every position.
Including ending terms that people, oh, interesting.
And it's not just planning, it's every commission.
People might be joining us in the audience.
Any ideas
on
of-
January 7th.
Water resources getting stood up yet? Water Resource Advisory Board?
The trigger for that right now, the like work that we have to do with the Water Resource Board would be S&P related. And we do, I think, have a timeline-ish from ecology.
They are planning to send back their conditional approval by summer 2026. It's based on workloads and staffing and all those other things. That doesn't mean we're not doing things and working with them ahead of time, but officially putting it back in our court in summer, and then it's gonna have to go through the board process before it can be finalized.
Have you gotten any feedback yet on conditions?
No, that's part of all that.
They're not even.
I'm still
Slow
waiting.
dripping yet.
I'm supposed to hear by the end of the year. I don't know if that gets pushed out a little bit, but first thing is an initial preview of their feedback and then a chance to kind of, for lack of a better term, negotiate and say, no, it's here, it's on this page, look at it, and does this suffice? And do all those sorts of things before they finalize that. So that's what the next step that I'm looking forward to, and still expecting by the end of the year, but we'll see. I'll ask for an update by January 15th if I don't see it.
Sorry, just looking at the roster to see the terms.
It's not accurate on our website.
None of those are accurate.
Oh, okay.
We're digging in back into the most recent ordinance. Tosh and I are gonna sit down. We think we might have it figured out, but
Calendar with agenda items. Forum on December 17th, or are people gonna be traveling for the holiday?
Shouldn't be an issue.
here.
Very good. And then January 7th, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
I don't know if I'll even have term then, so we'll see.
Hopefully we get
My
an
term ends
update
at the end of the
between
year.
now and the end of the year.
It is in September. To be renewed.
Anything for the good of the order? Commissioner Castillo.
I don't know if anybody else had been watching any of the board work sessions of late, but I found it interesting that the board had made some decisions on some of the items that came through the planning commission. Specifically that the Martin Way rezone, they decided to not move forward with and want to wrap that into a more comprehensive Martin Way study. And that the Black Lake Quarry is moving forward with its rezone in a 4-1 vote.
Is that the opposite of what we voted on both items?
It was a 6-4 decision from the planning commission and the board voted 1-4. Yeah, so they went
With the Martin Way, what I will say is the planning commission voted to approve that rezone, but the planning commission did also recommend that that be considered in the broader context of the entire Martin Way and a full look at rezoning the entire corridor.
It was a yes and, not a no and though, so I'm still saying.
And they focused on the and. So they said no and. So
I'm just saying, yes and no and are not the same things.
not the and part.
On the bright side, anyone who likes to follow the board online, they seem to have fixed the live streaming issue, at least as of this week. We were able to live stream the agenda setting and board meetings, so that's great.
Make a decision about ADUs.
They kicked that forward. They have not decided on that one yet, I don't think. Because Ty was.
Chair,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm just, on the ADUs, there was a lot of board discussion about it, like, was just mentioned. But Derek, do you have any update? There was some indication they were going to kick that back to the planning commission for more discussion.
They were gonna kick it back to staff to incorporate some changes that the board wanted to see to the ADUs. That included, and I'm gonna do this off the top of my head, so please don't quote me on this. Ensuring that they use a shared driveway. They wanted it to be the 1,000 square foot maximum consistent with the cities. They wanted to see also the an ability to basically waive the shared driveway if there were other like environmental constraints, like if there were critical areas or
Greenfield.
septic, drainfield, wells, those types of things. But
Okay.
they kicked it back to staff to incorporate changes.
Okay.
Well, you guys won't have that back then for this comp plan update then, will you? So it won't get implemented until the year after.
I think it's going back in the next day or two if it hasn't already gone back.
Okay.
It was a
Wham bam.
rapid
Yeah.
turnaround.
I heard that they were gonna bring it up on the 16 December board meeting. Is that correct?
I think they're gonna consider those final changes.
Yeah.
That's when they vote on it.
Yeah.
It would be a yes or no at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember our conversations around the maximum square footage. I think state law changed, right? It has to be a minimum of 1,000 square feet, right? And it,
That's
the maximum, the lowest the maximum can be, I think, is 1,000. Pretty much.
And I think those rules were for cities and urban growth areas. And some of the comment that came during like the public hearings was like, please make this consistent with your neighboring jurisdiction.
Because some of the cities have sub 1,000, I think, but those won't hold up once the federal laws go, or the state laws go into effect.
Emily.
This is the only no vote on Black Lake?
Yeah, Emily voted no on Black Lake.
What was our, we were
6-4. Well,
They were figuring 6-3 and would have been 6-4.
if Mr. Halverson
was absent that day.
We're presuming how he votes now.
What's that?
Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm not making any presumptions.
Okay,
well,
well,
comment periods were quite clear on
having no further business, unless there's anything else for the good of the order. Going once, twice, okay, having no further business, meeting is adjourned.
I was looking at potential areas where debris flow would make sense.